The diner appeared out of nowhere, a smear of yellow light against the black mouth of the storm, the kind of place that exists only because the highway needed somewhere to die. 11 hours of rain-soaked asphalt had turned Ryder Kane into something barely human, his leather jacket sealed to his skin, his bones carrying the cold the way old bones do, deep, permanent, personal. He pulled the Harley under the canopy and sat there for a moment, engine ticking down like a clock nobody wanted to hear. Through the glass, he could see the usual wreckage of a Tuesday night: 3 truckers, a waitress moving like she'd been moving since before he was born, and a little girl sitting absolutely still at the corner booth, watching the door with eyes that had no business being that old. He should have kept riding. He almost did. What you're about to witness tonight is not a story about heroes. It's about what happens when the world fails a child so completely that the only person left standing between her and the dark is a broken man who doesn't believe he has anything left to give. Before we go any further, if this kind of story hits you somewhere deep, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world you're watching from, and stay with us all the way to the end, because what happens in that desert diner near the Arizona border is going to stay with you for a long time. This is the girl who called him Dad. The bell above the door had lost its voice somewhere around the Clinton administration. It gave a single defeated click when Ryder pushed through, and the warm air hit him like a wall, cooking grease and burnt coffee, and the particular sadness of fluorescent lighting that had never been kind to anyone. He stood in the doorway long enough to let the water run off his jacket onto the mat, long enough to scan the room without appearing to scan it. Old habit. The kind that didn't have an off switch. 3 truckers at the counter, big men, soft around the eyes, the kind of tired that came from too many miles and not enough sleep. The waitress, her name tag said Dolores, but she had the face of someone who had left that name behind years ago, moved between the pie case and the coffee station with the economy of someone who had mapped every inch of this room in her body. A cook somewhere behind the pass-through, the sound of a spatula, a radio playing country music at the volume of an apology. And the girl. She was in the far corner booth, the one closest to the emergency exit. 7 years old, maybe 8, though something in the way she sat made her seem younger and older at the same time. Her clothes were soaked through, a pink jacket that had once been cheerful, jeans with a cartoon star on the knee, sneakers that had given up entirely. A single paper cup of hot chocolate sat in front of her, mostly untouched, the whipped cream long collapsed. She wasn't eating, she wasn't crying. She was watching the door with the focused attention of someone who had learned that what comes through a door is rarely good. Ryder took the booth 2 down from her because sitting directly beside a strange child alone in a diner at 11 at night was not something he was going to do, and because he needed a sightline to the parking lot. He ordered coffee without looking at the menu. Dolores brought it without asking if he needed more time. He drank. He watched the window. He watched the girl in the reflection of the window. She hadn't moved. She hadn't looked at her phone because she didn't have a phone. She hadn't flagged down Dolores, hadn't spoken to the truckers. She had simply positioned herself in that corner booth like a small animal that had identified the least exposed position in a dangerous room and was waiting for whatever came next with the terrifying patience of someone who had no other options. Ryder knew that posture. He'd seen it in Fallujah. He'd seen it in Helmand. He'd seen it in the faces of people who had been waiting for the worst for so long that they'd stopped flinching when it arrived. He looked at Dolores. Dolores looked back at him with an expression that said, "I know. I don't know what to do either." He was halfway through his second coffee, water still dripping from his jacket onto the vinyl seat, when he heard the small sound of movement. Sneakers on linoleum. He didn't look up. He tracked her in the window's reflection. The girl had slid out of her booth and was crossing the diner with the deliberateness of a child who had made a decision and was not going to reconsider it. She stopped beside his table. He looked up. Her eyes were dark brown, the kind of brown that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, and they were completely steady. No tears, no performance, just that awful, focused clarity. She said, "Please pretend you're my dad." The diner didn't stop. The country music kept playing. Dolores's coffee pot kept moving. But something in the quality of the air shifted, the way it shifts before lightning, The moment when the storm stops being about weather and becomes about something else entirely. Ryder looked at her for a long second. He looked at the door. He looked back at her. He said, "Sit down." She sat across from him without hesitation because she had already decided to trust him and the decision was done. It was in the past. She had moved on from it the way people move on from decisions that cost them everything or save them. There's no difference in the body, not really. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "How long have you been here?" "Since 4. It was 11:17. "Where are your parents?" Something moved across her face. A door closing. "My mom's not here." "Your dad?" "I don't have a dad." "Anyone else?" "No." He studied her. The pink jacket. The cartoon star. The eyes that were 7 years old and 40 years old at the same time. "You called me dad because you look like you know how to be scary," she said. "And I need someone who looks scary." Before he could process that, the bell above the door made its defeated click. The man who walked in from the rain was not from here. Everything about him announced it. The cut of his jacket, the quality of his shoes, the way he moved through a room, as though the room existed to accommodate his passage rather than the other way around. He was somewhere in his late 40s, silver at the temples, the kind of face that photographed well and meant nothing. He stood just inside the door and looked around the diner with the unhurried patience of someone conducting a systematic search. The girl's hand closed around Ryder's wrist under the table. Her grip was extraordinary for a child that size. Ryder didn't look down. He was watching the man's eyes track the room, the truckers, Dolores, the cook's window, and then find the corner booth where the girl had been sitting and find it empty, and then begin to move. Ryder lifted his coffee cup. He angled his body just slightly, enough to create a wall. He said loudly enough to carry, "You want the cherry pie or the apple?" The girl looked at him for a microsecond. She understood immediately. "Cherry." "Dolores." He raised 2 fingers. 2 cherry pies. The man's eyes had found them. Ryder met his gaze across the diner with the specific expression that said, "I am a father, and this is my child, and there is nothing interesting here." He'd worn that expression in other contexts, checkpoints, interrogation rooms, places where projecting the right kind of ordinary was the difference between coming home and not. The man held his gaze for 3 seconds, 2 seconds longer than was comfortable. Then his eyes moved on, completing their sweep of the diner, finding nothing, and he turned and walked back out into the rain. The bell clicked. The girl's grip on Ryder's wrist did not loosen for a very long time. Dolores put 2 pieces of cherry pie on the table. She looked at Ryder. He looked at her. Some communication passed between them that had nothing to do with pie. Ryder pushed the plate toward the girl. "Eat something." She ate. She ate with the focused, mechanical efficiency of a child who had learned that food was logistics, not pleasure. He watched her and said nothing and drank his coffee and watched the parking lot, where the rain was hammering the asphalt, and the shadows were doing what shadows always did when he watched them, moving. A black SUV was idling at the far edge of the lot, running lights only. No reason to be parked there. No reason for running lights only. He said, "What's your name?" "Lena." "Lena what?" She looked at him, another door closing behind those eyes. "Hart." "Lena Hart." He said it like he was filing it. "I'm Ryder. I know you're not really my dad." "Yeah. But thank you for pretending." "Don't thank me yet." He was still watching the SUV. "How'd you get here?" "Bus? From Tucson?" "By yourself?" "Yes." A 7-year-old on a Greyhound from Tucson alone in November. He filed that too. "Where were you trying to get to?" "My aunt. She lives in Flagstaff, but I didn't have enough money for the right bus, and..." Something cracked, just for a moment, in the steadiness of her voice. She brought it back. She was practiced at that. "The driver let me off here." "Does your aunt know you're coming?" "I couldn't call. My phone died, and I didn't want to use the diner phone because..." She looked toward the door. "Because then they'd know where I was." Ryder put his coffee cup down very carefully. "Lena, the man who just came in." "Yes." "He's looking for you." Yes. Why? The longest pause of the evening. Outside, the rain had increased. The SUV hadn't moved. The girl across the table from him sat very still, and in the fluorescent light she looked like a child made of glass. Not fragile exactly, but transparent, as though the thing she was carrying inside was visible if you looked at the right angle. She said, "Because of what my mom found out." He waited. "My mom was a journalist," Lena said, and then, in the completely flat tone of a child who had already cried about this until there were no tears left in a particular geography. "She died 4 days ago." The country music played. The cook turned something in the kitchen. The rain came down. Ryder said very quietly, "I'm sorry." The police said it was a car accident. Her eyes came up to his, and there was nothing childlike in them now. It wasn't a car accident. He called Mason at 12:30, standing outside under the canopy, rain coming down 3 feet in front of his boots in a solid curtain. Inside, through the glass, Lena was still at the table, both hands around a fresh hot chocolate that Dolores had brought without being asked. The SUV was still in the lot. A second vehicle had joined it, a dark sedan, no plates visible from this distance. Mason answered on the second ring because Mason always answered on the second ring. "You in trouble?" Mason said, instead of hello. "Not yet. But I need you to run a name. Claire Hart, journalist, Arizona." The sound of Mason moving somewhere, a chair, a keyboard. Mason Crow was 53 years old and looked 65, which had nothing to do with age and everything to do with weight. The weight of 2 tours in the Marines, the weight of 20 years as the Road Wolves president, the weight of every decision made in rooms where none of the choices were good. His voice had the quality of gravel under a slow tire. "Claire Hart," Mason said, "Tucson Tribune, investigative reporter. They're saying car accident, single vehicle, lost control on the I-10 outside of Marana 4 days ago." A pause. "There's a daughter listed, Lena, 7 years old, currently..." Another pause, longer. "Listed as missing. She's with me." Silence. "Mason, I heard you." His voice had changed. Something tightened in it. "There are 2 names coming up in connection with the Hart story, background sources. Nothing in print yet, but..." A long pause, the sound of Mason thinking. "Ryder, if this is what I think it is, you need to be very careful about what you do next." "I'm already past careful." "I know." A breath. "I know you are. That's what worries me. There are 2 vehicles in this parking lot that weren't here when I rode in. I've got a 7-year-old girl who got on a bus alone because she's smart enough to know that whoever killed her mother isn't finished. The rain, the running lights in the lot. She walked up to me and asked me to pretend to be her dad." A long, long silence from Mason. Then, "What'd you say?" "I said sit down." Something that might have been a laugh if it had been willing to commit. "Where are you?" Ryder told him. "Stay there," Mason said. "Don't go back out in that. I'll make some calls." "I don't need..." "I'm not doing it for you." A pause. "I'm doing it because a 7-year-old girl got on a bus alone." The line went quiet. Not dead. Mason was still there. Ryder could hear him breathing, the specific rhythm of a man calculating cost and consequence, the mental math of a club president deciding how much of his people's safety he was willing to commit to a problem that was not, technically, his. Ryder looked through the glass at Lena, who was watching the door again with her ancient eyes, her hand still wrapped around the warm mug. Mason said, "Get her somewhere warm. Don't use your card. Already ahead of you." And Ryder, one more pause, the weight in it. "If those vehicles move toward the diner, I know. You call me before you do anything. Mason, I mean it." He didn't answer that. He ended the call and stood in the rain for another moment, watching the SUV, watching the sedan. The rain came down on the asphalt and turned the running lights into long, wavering smears of red and white. He'd been in places like this before, not diners, not parking lots, but the essential situation, the moment just before, the last quiet moment before the shape of everything changed. He had a particular relationship with those moments. He recognized them the way you recognize a voice from somewhere you can't name. He went back inside. Dolores was the first surprise of the evening. Not the last, not the biggest, but the first. When Ryder came back to the table and told her quietly that he needed to get the girl somewhere safe and that there were people outside who were not safe, Dolores looked at him for 3 seconds, looked at Lena, and said, "There's a back room. Used to be an office. It's got a lock." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank whoever decided to build this place with a back door." She was already moving, already lowering the blinds on the street-side windows with the practiced efficiency of someone who had made this kind of decision before and didn't need to examine it. "I'll tell them she's gone, that she caught a ride an hour ago." "You don't have to, mister," Dolores said, not unkindly. "I've been working this diner for 19 years. I have seen everything that comes off that highway. And I have never seen a child sit by herself for 7 hours watching a door without it meaning something bad." She looked at Lena. Something passed between the woman and the girl, some acknowledgement that had nothing to do with words. "She eats, she sleeps, and then you get her somewhere safe. That's all I'm asking." They moved to the back room. It was small and dusty and smelled of old paper, but it had a cot and a space heater and a door that locked from the inside. Ryder sat with his back against the wall. Lena sat on the cot and looked at him with those steady eyes. "Are you really going to help me?" she said. He thought about the right answer to that for longer than he should have. He had a particular problem with promises, which was that he took them seriously. Seriously enough that he was careful about making them, because the ones he hadn't been able to keep had weight that didn't go away. A dead squad member in a village outside of Marja, a brother from the club who'd needed him and gotten a voicemail. The particular architecture of failure that built itself into a man's bones over time. "Yeah," he said, "I'm going to help you." She looked at him for another moment, calibrating. Then she lay down on the cot and pulled her knees to her chest and closed her eyes. She was asleep inside of 4 minutes. The deep, total sleep of a child who has been running on adrenaline for days and has finally found a place where she believes, in some fundamental way, that she can stop. He watched her sleep and thought about Claire Hart. He thought about a woman driving the I-10 at night, alone, carrying whatever she'd found. The thing that was worth dying for. Worth having your 7-year-old daughter put on a bus alone in November. He thought about what kind of story ends a journalist's life. Not the ordinary kinds, not the political exposés, not the corruption pieces, the standard machinery of accountability journalism that made powerful people uncomfortable and occasionally ended careers but rarely ended lives. The kind that ended lives was different. The kind that ended lives was the kind where the people you were writing about had already decided that exposure was not an option they were willing to survive. He thought about the man in the diner, the quality of his stillness, the systematic sweep of his eyes. He hadn't been a local. He hadn't been law enforcement. Ryder had enough experience with law enforcement to recognize the particular posture, the specific relationship to authority that law enforcement people carried in their bodies. This man had a different relationship to authority. He was authority, the private kind, the kind that didn't answer to anyone because the people who might have made him answer to someone had decided they didn't want to. Lena made a small sound in her sleep, something between a word and a breath. Her hand curled tighter around the edge of the cot. Ryder looked at the ceiling and thought about what Mason had said. If this is what I think it is, and what Mason thought it was, and what it would mean for a 7-year-old girl and a dead woman's story and the thing Ryder had become since the war. His phone buzzed, a text from Mason, 2 words. "We're coming." He put the phone in his jacket pocket and listened to the rain. The rest of that night was one of the stranger pieces of his recent life, which was saying something. He sat against the backroom wall for 6 hours while the storm outside went from bad to catastrophic, and then gradually back down to merely persistent. Dolores came twice, once with sandwiches, once with coffee. She reported, with the flat effect of someone describing a weather pattern, the 2 men in dark coats had come in around 2 a.m, asked about a little girl, and been told by Dolores and the remaining trucker at the counter that she'd left hours ago in someone's pickup. The men had stayed for 20 minutes, drinking coffee they didn't taste, watching the room, and then left. The SUV was gone by 4. the sedan by 4:30, which didn't mean they weren't still out there, which meant they had either believed the story or they had decided to regroup. He'd operated in enough fluid situations to know that the second possibility was the more dangerous one. People who retreated to regroup were people with resources, and people with resources were people who came back differently next time. Lena woke at 6 with the same composure she'd had the night before. She sat up and looked at him and said, "Did they leave?" "For now." She nodded. She folded her hands in her lap. "What's the plan?" He almost smiled, a 7-year-old asking about the plan. "What's your aunt's full name?" "Carol Reyes. Her number's in my backpack." She reached under the cot and produced a small backpack, purple, with a constellation pattern, very much the backpack of a child who had once been allowed to be a child. She unzipped it with careful precision and handed him a folded piece of paper. He looked at it. "Aunt Carol, Flagstaff." A number, below it, in a child's careful printing. Mom's work laptop, bottom drawer, left side. Password, Lena 2016. Below that, underlined, "Do not trust police." He looked at the note for a long time. "My mom gave that to me," Lena said, 3 weeks ago. She said if anything ever happened, the voice held, just barely. She said if anything ever happened to her, I needed to go to Aunt Carol, and I needed to remember about the laptop, and I needed to not talk to the police until I talked to Carol first. 3 weeks ago, Ryder said. Yes. She knew. Not a question. I think so. A pause. She was scared. She tried not to show me, but I could tell. A beat. I can always tell. He thought about a woman 3 weeks from her death, sitting with her 7-year-old daughter and folding a piece of paper with an escape route. He thought about the specific kind of courage that required, not the loud, sudden kind, the kind you performed under fire when the adrenaline took over and the choice made itself, but the quiet, deliberate kind, the kind that required you to look at your child's face and prepare her for a world in which you might not be there. He folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket beside his phone. Okay, he said. We're going to Flagstaff. The Harley was not ideal transport for a 7-year-old in November in the aftermath of a storm. Ryder was aware of this. He was also aware that his truck, which existed somewhere in Tucson where he'd been heading before the weather turned and the diner appeared, was 2 hours in the wrong direction, and that the wrong direction was where the people looking for Lena had come from, and that every hour he stayed stationary in this parking lot was an hour closer to them coming back with more information and different approaches. Dolores solved the first problem without being asked. My son's truck is out back, she said, in the tone of someone establishing facts. He won't need it until Saturday. You can take it to Flagstaff and he'll pick it up. She looked at him with the specific expression of a person who is about to say something she has already decided to say and is just waiting for the right moment in the sentence. He was Marine Corps. Second tour, Anbar Province. He'd want me to. Ryder looked at her. She looked back. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said, for the second time. Thank whoever raised you right. He didn't pursue that. The truck was a 2009 F-150, blue, with a cracked right mirror and a Semper Fi sticker on the rear window and a half bag of beef jerky in the cup holder. It started on the second try. Lena climbed in without commentary, pulled the seatbelt across her lap with the efficiency of a child who understood that seatbelts were important, and sat looking at the windshield as the engine warmed up. He pulled out of the lot slowly. No lights visible in the parking area, no vehicles following as he turned north toward the interstate. The sun was just beginning to suggest itself behind the cloud cover, not appearing, not making any promises, just indicating that it still existed somewhere back there in the dark. Tell me about your mom, he said. A long pause. She was good at her job, Lena said. She always said that stories mattered because the people in them mattered. Even when the people were... She stopped, started again. Even when the stories were hard. What was she working on when... I don't know everything. She didn't tell me the details because she said I was too young. A pause. But I heard her on the phone sometimes, at night when she thought I was asleep. Another pause. She was scared. But she also... Lena turned and looked at him with those ancient, dark eyes. She also sounded like she thought it was the most important thing she'd ever done. She said it once to someone on the phone. She said, "This is the most important thing I've ever done." He drove. The road was wet and empty, the desert on both sides of it washed pale by the night's rain, the scrub and rock looking freshly made, the sky above them a deep gray blue that was not quite morning. "She saved it," Lena said. "Whatever she found. She saved it somewhere before the accident." Her hands were in her lap, very still. "She told me there was a copy. She said she'd made sure there was a copy that they couldn't find." Ryder's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. "Do you know where?" "No." A beat. "But Carol might. They talked every day." He thought about the laptop. Bottom drawer, left side. Password. Lena 2016. He thought about a woman systematically preparing for the worst, leaving breadcrumbs in the right places, making sure that the work she'd died for had somewhere to land. His phone buzzed. "Mason, on the Road Wolves encrypted channel. 2 vehicles left the Super 8 in Winslow at 0540. Heading your direction. Who's watching your 6? He read it and typed back. "No one yet. Moving north on 89. Don't stop. There's a place outside of Ash Fork, Road Wolves affiliate. They're expecting you. I'll be there by noon." He put the phone in his jacket and looked at the road and thought about the fact that someone had been tracking his phone, or tracking the diner, or tracking something, and had communicated the movement of those vehicles to Mason through a chain of contacts that he didn't want to know the details of, and that Mason was coming, and that the Road Wolves were already moving, because that was what the Road Wolves did. He thought about the first time he'd come back from Fallujah, and Mason had been there, in the parking lot outside the VA hospital in San Diego, sitting on his Harley, not saying anything, just there, and how that had been more than anything else anyone had offered him in that specific season of his life. He thought about how the club had been built on exactly that principle, the understanding that the world failed people in specific ways, and that the job was not to fix the world, but to make sure that when it failed you, you were not alone when you hit the ground. "Hey," said Lena. "Yeah." "Are you scared?" He considered the honest answer to this. He had a particular relationship with fear, not the absence of it, but the ability to put it somewhere useful. His instructors at Quantico had called it controlled physiological response. Mason called it the place where fear lives in a grown man. He'd always privately thought of it as a room with a locked door that he kept the key to. "A little," he said. She seemed satisfied with that. She looked back at the road. "Me too," she said, "but less than yesterday." "Good. Because yesterday I was alone." He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. The truck moved north through the washed-out desert and the not-quite morning, and behind them, somewhere in the growing light, on roads that paralleled theirs, 2 vehicles were moving with the unhurried patience of people who didn't need to hurry because they had resources and time and the absolute certainty that their quarry had nowhere left to go. They were wrong about that last part, but they didn't know it yet. The place outside Ash Fork was a mechanic's shop, the legitimate kind, in the sense that it had lifts and tools and an actual business license, and the other kind, in the sense that the man who ran it, a quiet ex-Army medic named Dex, who had 3 Road Wolves patches on his vest and a prosthetic left hand that he could still use to tighten a bolt to factory spec, had connections to every dirt road between Flagstaff and the California border. Dex looked at Ryder, looked at Lena, said nothing for a moment. Then, "Coffee's fresh. Bathroom's in the back. Sit tight." He went to make phone calls that Ryder wasn't invited to hear, which was exactly what Ryder needed him to do. Lena sat on a workbench and ate a granola bar from her backpack and looked around the shop with the focused, analytical gaze of a child processing a new environment for threat and safety. Ryder watched her do it and thought, "You didn't learn that from a television show. You learned that from watching your mother." "She taught you things," he said. Lena looked at him. "What?" "Your mom. She taught you how to be safe, how to watch." He nodded at the way she was positioned, back to the wall, sight lines to both doors. "Where to sit?" Something moved across her face. The door cracked, just slightly, and behind it was something raw and recent and enormous. Then it closed again. She said, Lena stopped, started over. She said that knowing how to pay attention was the same as knowing how to take care of yourself. She said most people sleepwalk through rooms. A pause. She didn't sleepwalk. No, Ryder said. She didn't. Outside, the sound of motorcycles. Not one, not two. Multiple bikes approaching from the east, the specific deep percussion of Harley engines that Ryder knew the way he knew his own heartbeat. Had known it for 11 years since the day he'd walked out of the discharge center in San Diego, and Mason had been waiting in that parking lot. Lena stood up. Those are, she started. Friends, Ryder said. Those are friends. The shop door opened, and Mason Crow walked in. He was a large man, not the kind of large that came from a gym, but the kind that came from decades of manual labor and physical consequence, from the specific architecture that life built in men who had survived things that were supposed to kill them. He was wearing his road wolves cut over a dark jacket, his gray-streaked hair tied back, his face doing the thing it always did when it processed a new situation, going very still, very focused, the way a camera focuses before it fires. He looked at Ryder. He looked at Lena. He looked at the backpack with the constellation pattern. He looked back at Ryder with the expression of a man who had agreed to something in general terms and was now confronting it in specific terms, and was finding that the specific terms were worse and also more important than the general ones. He said, "How you doing, kid?" Lena looked at him steadily. "Okay," she said. "Are you the road wolves?" "Some of us." "My mom wrote about motorcycle clubs once," Lena said, "for a story. She said most of what people thought they knew was wrong." Mason looked at her for a moment. Something in his face, something ancient and sealed, shifted almost imperceptibly. "Your mom sounds like she knew what she was talking about," he said. "She did," Lena said. "She always did." Outside, through the shop windows, Ryder could see the bikes in the lot. 4, 5, 6 Harleys arranged with the unconscious territorial precision of men who always knew exactly where they were in relation to every exit. His brothers, or the ones who were here. Good men, scarred men, men who had driven through the night because Mason said someone needs us, which was the only reason any of them ever needed. He moved to stand beside Mason, and the two men stood side by side in the way they had stood in a lot of different rooms over the years, not speaking, the communication between them the kind that didn't need language. Then Mason said, very quietly, so the girl couldn't hear, "I know what Claire Hart was investigating." Ryder waited. She had a source inside a federal task force. She'd been building the story for 8 months. A pause, the weight of it settling. "It's not just trafficking, Ryder. It's the people running the task force that was supposed to be stopping the trafficking. The people who were supposed to be protecting kids like—" He stopped, looked at Lena, who was sitting back on the workbench, looking at her hands, either genuinely not listening or performing not listening with remarkable skill. He finished the sentence in a different way. "The people nobody was supposed to investigate." Ryder said, "She found proof. She found more than proof." Mason's voice was absolutely flat. "She found names, dates, financial records. She sent copies to 3 different places before she died. We think 2 of those places have already been compromised." "The third?" Mason looked at him. "Mason." "The third was her sister," Mason said. "Carol Reyes, Flagstaff." Outside, one of the road wolves whistled, a specific pattern, 2 short, 1 long, the universal signal that meant, "We have company." Ryder looked at the window, then at Lena, then at Mason. Mason said, "Dex." Dex was already moving, back room, specific direction, the practiced efficiency of a man who had run field operations in places where being slow was something you only did once. Ryder crossed to Lena. "We need to move. Right now." She slid off the workbench without argument, grabbed her backpack in a single motion, and looked at him with those eyes. "How many?" she said. "Don't know yet." "Is it the same ones from the diner?" "Probably more." She absorbed that, put it somewhere, reached out and took his hand. Not desperately, not with the clinging grip of a child in panic, but with the deliberate, intentional grip of someone who had made a decision about where she was going to put her trust and was not going to be argued out of it. And in that moment, in that mechanic's shop outside of Ashfork, while the road wolves moved into position outside and the sound of approaching vehicles came up through the floor like a vibration. In that moment, Ryder Kane felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt responsible for something worth being responsible for. He felt, for the first time in 11 years, that he was standing in the right place. He had no idea yet what it was going to cost him. Outside, tires on gravel, doors opening, the sound of men moving with the specific purpose of men who had already decided how this ended. Mason said, "Ryder, I know. Stay close to her." "I know, Mason." The lights in the shop went out. In the sudden dark, Ryder felt Lena's hand tighten. Not panicked, just adjusting, recalibrating to the new input. And then he was moving. She was moving with him. And in the workshop, darkness lit only by the gray light coming through the windows, the road wolves were a wall between what was coming through those doors and what they had decided to protect. But then Dex said from the back room, his voice stripped down to something barely above a whisper, "There's a tracker. On the truck." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, "Not Ryder's phone," Mason said slowly. "Not the diner. They tagged the truck." Ryder looked down at Lena in the dark. Dolores' son's truck. The one with the Semper Fi sticker, the one they'd been in for 3 hours. They hadn't been followed. They'd been led here. And in the shop outside Ashfork, with boots beginning to sound on the gravel just outside the door, Ryder understood, with the cold, total clarity of a man who had survived too many moments of too late realization, that whoever was hunting this child had resources that he had not yet fully accounted for, and that the road wolves were about to find out exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. The tracker was a professional unit, not the consumer-grade magnetic disc you could buy at any electronics store, but the kind of device that required a manufacturer relationship and a budget line that didn't appear on public invoices. Dex found it in 40 seconds, running his good hand along the underside of the rear bumper in the dark with the practiced efficiency of a man who had swept vehicles in 2 countries and learned the hard way that missing one was a permanent kind of lesson. He pulled it free and held it up in the thin gray light from the window, and the 5 men who were looking at it said nothing for a moment, because sometimes the thing you're holding tells you more about your situation than any conversation could. Mason took it from him, turned it over, read the serial prefix with his eyes the way you read a sentence you already know the ending to. "Government contractor," he said, flat, informational. "Not law enforcement, private." "Difference matters," said a man named Garrett, who was standing near the door with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the particular configuration it took when he was deciding whether to be angry yet. Garrett was 41, broad across the shoulders in the way that came from ranching rather than a gym, and he had a scar from his left ear to his jawline that he never explained and nobody asked about. He was the Road Wolves' sergeant-at-arms, which meant he was the man Mason trusted to stand between a problem and the rest of the club. "Law enforcement, you've got process. Contractor, you've got..." "Nothing," Ryder said. "You've got nothing. They don't file, they don't answer. They don't stop because someone shows them paperwork." Silence. Outside, the gravel. The sound of someone walking, measured, unhurried, the stride of a man who believed the situation was already resolved in his favor. 1 set of footsteps, then a second. Ryder counted. 2 men on the near side of the building. He didn't know the back yet. He looked at Lena. She was pressed against the interior wall, 3 feet from the door to the back room, her backpack against her chest with both arms around it like it was a thing that mattered. Her face was completely still. Not frozen. Still. The difference was everything. Frozen was shock. Still was a child who had decided that her job right now was to not be a problem. He caught her eye and held up 2 fingers, then pointed toward the back. She understood immediately. Moved without sound, without urgency, just moved. The Constellation backpack disappearing into the dark of the back room. Dex followed her without being asked. Mason put the tracker in his vest pocket. He looked at Garrett. Garrett uncrossed his arms. The knock on the shop door was 3 times, firm, the knock of someone who expected it to be answered. Mason said to Ryder, very quietly, "You want this, or I've got it." "Ryder, I've got it, Mason." A beat. Mason stepped back. Ryder crossed to the door, turned the deadbolt, and opened it. The man standing there was not the same man from the diner. Similar in the way that men who do the same job for the same organization start to resemble each other. The grooming, the posture, the specific kind of neutrality that was trained rather than natural. He was younger than the diner man, mid-30s, with the build of someone who ran 5 miles a day and thought about it as a professional requirement. He was holding nothing in his hands, which was the most dangerous possible configuration. Behind him, another man, older, hanging back at the edge of the gravel, positioning himself for a sightline on the shop's second window. "Good morning," said the man at the door. The pleasantness of it was so complete it was almost impressive. "Sorry to bother you this early. We're looking for a vehicle, blue Ford F15. Partial plate ending in 747. It was reported—" "Not here," Ryder said. A pause. The man's eyes moved past Ryder into the shop, doing the same work as the diner man, the systematic inventory, the calculation. He would be counting bodies. He would be assessing the vests, the patches, the specific quality of attention that the men in this room were paying him. "Any chance it came through earlier? Our information had it passing." "My information says you're 2 minutes from leaving," Ryder said. "So." Another pause. Something moved behind the man's eyes. Not anger, not quite. Reassessment, the mental recalculation of a man who had arrived expecting one thing and was processing another. "We don't want any trouble," the man said. "I know you don't." Ryder held the door exactly where it was. "Drive safe." He closed the door, turned the deadbolt. The shop was completely silent for 4 seconds. Then Garrett said, "That bought us maybe 20 minutes. "Less," Mason said. "They'll call it in," said a man named Peso. Short, wire-lean, tattooed from the collar up, who had said nothing until now, and whose silence, in Ryder's experience, was always more consequential than his speech. 2 minutes they're on a satellite phone. Whoever's running them knows we're here and knows we're involved, and now we're not just inconvenient, I know what we are," Mason said. "Do you?" Peso looked at him. Not disrespectfully. Peso didn't do disrespect to Mason. Not really. Not after 12 years. But with the directness of a man who believed that the next sentence needed to be said clearly. "Because 3 hours ago we were doing a favor for a brother. Now we're standing between 2 government contractors and whatever they're looking for. And what they're looking for is a 7-year-old kid, and I want to be sure that we all understand what that means." The room held that. Mason looked at Peso with the expression he wore when he was deciding whether to end a conversation or continue it. He continued it. "What do you think it means, Peso?" "It means whoever's running those contractors has enough reach to put private assets in the field overnight across 2 states. It means they had a tracker on a civilian vehicle that came out of a highway diner, which means either they were watching the diner or they were watching someone who went to the diner. It means—" Peso stopped, restarted. "It means this isn't a missing kid situation, Mason. It's a liability situation. And we just became part of the liability." The words sat in the dark shop like objects. Ryder heard, from the back room, the faint sound of Lena moving, adjusting position. She was listening. He knew she was listening. She was her mother's daughter. "She has nowhere else to go," Ryder said. Peso looked at him. "I know that." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying—" A pause. Peso ran his hand over his face. He was tired. They were all tired. 3 of them had been riding since before midnight. "I'm saying we need to decide what we're actually committing to before we're in too deep to decide anything." "We're already in too deep," Garrett said. "Exactly my point." "That's not—" Garrett shook his head. "That's not what I meant. I meant we're already in it, so the question of whether we commit isn't a question anymore. The question is how we do it right." A silence. A different quality of silence. Not the silence before an argument, but the silence after an argument that had concluded before it finished. Mason looked at Ryder. "The aunt, Carol Reyes, Flagstaff. Yeah. If they've been tracking the truck from the diner, they know the general direction. They'll have the aunt's address if they have Claire Hart's full background, which they do. Probably. So we can't take her there." We have to get her something first, Ryder said. The laptop, whatever Claire left. Another silence. This one had weight. Mason said, "Where's the laptop?" "Claire's house, Tucson." "Which is—" Mason let that sit. "Which is the first place they'll be watching," Garrett finished. "Yeah. I know a way in," Ryder said. Everyone looked at him. He hadn't intended to say that. The sentence had arrived before the decision that preceded it, which was a thing that happened to him sometimes. The operational part of his brain making commitments that the rest of him was still arguing about. He'd learned to trust it, mostly. It had kept him alive in places where the deliberative part would have gotten him killed, but it created situations in rooms like this one. "Explain that," Mason said. "Totem." He explained it in the back room with Dex and Lena present because there was nowhere else to put them, and because Lena, it turned out, had information he needed. Claire Hart had bought the house in the Barrio Hollywood neighborhood of Tucson 11 years ago, before Lena was born, when the neighborhood was cheaper and the journalism job was newer and the life was different in ways that Ryder could only partially reconstruct from the evidence. She'd stayed because it was home, which was a reason that made complete sense and no practical sense simultaneously, the way most reasons for staying anywhere did. The house had a specific architecture that Lena described with a precision that was slightly eerie. The side gate that didn't latch properly, the kitchen window that could be lifted from outside if you knew where to press, the neighbor on the left who kept a dog that barked at everyone except people it had already cataloged, which included, Lena said, several of her mother's friends who had used the side entrance for reasons she hadn't fully understood at the time. "Your mom had people who came in through the kitchen window?" Ryder said. "Sometimes." A pause. She called them her sources. "They came when it was dark." He thought about what that meant. About a woman building a story for 8 months, running sources who needed to arrive without being seen, in a neighborhood where a motorcycle club member or a man in a dark car would be noticed and remembered. He thought about the specific kind of professional paranoia that produced a kitchen window protocol, and about whether that paranoia had been enough, and about the answer to that question. It hadn't been enough. But the laptop was still there. He had to believe that because the alternative, that they'd already recovered it, that the copy was already gone, that Claire Hart had died for a story that had died with her, was a direction he wasn't going to look in right now. "Does anyone else know about the window?" he asked Lena. Her editor, Mr. Vance. She said the name with a specific flatness. She talked to him more than anyone. "Did you trust him?" "Mom did." A beat, very small. "I don't know." He filed that. "Anyone else?" "There was a man who came sometimes. She called him Frank. I never saw his face." She paused. "He always left before morning. He brought USB drives." Mason, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, said nothing. His face said several things. Ryder looked at him. "What?" "Claire Hart had a federal source," Mason said. "I knew that from the reporting on her." He stopped himself, recalibrated. "There's a name that's come up in connection with her investigation. A former federal agent named Francis Doyle. Left the Bureau 8 years ago under circumstances that were never fully explained. Went private sector, then went dark. Some people think he's an informant. Some people think he's something else." "What do you think?" Ryder asked. "I think," Mason said slowly, "that a man who brings USB, drives to a journalist's house in the middle of the night, and leaves before sunrise is a man who is either very brave or very afraid. And both of those things make him useful to someone and dangerous to someone else." He looked at Ryder. If he was feeding her information that compromised his former employers, then he's got a target on him too. "If he's still alive," Garrett said from the doorway. The room held that for a moment. Lena was sitting cross-legged on the floor with her backpack on her knees. She had been listening to all of this with the same focused, absorptive attention she'd given everything since the diner. She said without looking up, "His number is in the laptop." Every adult in the room looked at her. Mom kept a contacts file. She said it was the most important thing she had. She looked up then, those ancient eyes moving from face to face. She said if something ever happened to her, the most important thing was getting that file to people who could use it. "She told you that," Ryder said. "She didn't tell me. I heard her tell Frank." A pause. 3 weeks ago. The same night she gave me the paper. 3 weeks ago. The night Claire Hart had begun her contingency planning in earnest. The night she had sat with her daughter and folded an escape route into a piece of paper and called a man named Frank in the small hours and said the most important thing I've ever done. Ryder thought about what it meant to know you were running out of time and still show up the next morning, to make your daughter's breakfast and send her to school and answer your editor's calls and keep building the story, day by day, while the other thing, the thing with the dark cars and the private contractors, got closer. He thought about the specific quality of courage that required, and about whether he had it, and about what he owed a dead woman who'd had it in full measure. "We need to get to Tucson," he said. Mason did not agree immediately. This was one of the things Ryder respected most about him, and one of the things that had driven him nearly insane over 11 years. Mason's refusal to agree to anything immediately, his insistence on thinking in the full, which meant thinking about the people who weren't in the room as well as the people who were. They argued about it for 40 minutes in the cold shop, while Dex made coffee on a portable burner, and Lena sat in the back room and the morning got lighter outside the windows, bringing with it the particular clarity of a desert day after rain. Sharp edges, washed colors, the kind of visibility that was good for seeing things coming and equally good for being seen. "If we go to Tucson in force," Mason said, "we announce ourselves. Road wolves rolling into a residential neighborhood. We've got no play if there's law enforcement already on the scene." "Law enforcement isn't the issue," Ryder said. "Law enforcement is always potentially the issue. That's not—" Mason stopped, ran the heel of his hand across his jaw, the gesture he made when he was managing himself. "That's not what I'm arguing about. I'm arguing about approach." "One man," Ryder said. "Small profile. In and out. You. Me. And the kid?" "Stays here." Something moved in Mason's expression, a complicated thing. "She won't. She'll stay if I ask her to." "You sure about that?" Ryder wasn't sure about that. He was sure of very few things at that particular moment, which was a different kind of certainty. The certainty that the situation was beyond the point of sure. "I'll ask her," he said. Garrett said, from the corner where he'd been quiet for 10 minutes. "There's another problem." Both men looked at him. "Peso," Garrett said. Another silence. "He's not wrong," Mason said, "about what this means for the club." "I know he's not wrong. We have 3 pending federal reviews, Garrett's situation in Kingman. The Tucson chapter has—" "I know, Mason." Ryder looked at him. "I'm not asking you to put the club at risk. You asked us to come. I asked you to run a name. That's not—" Mason's voice was still level, controlled, but something in it had the quality of pressure, not anger, not quite, but the particular tension of a man who was holding several things at once that didn't fit together comfortably. "Ryder, when you call me at 12:30 with a 7-year-old girl and 2 private contractors in a parking lot, what do you think that call means?" Ryder looked at him. "It means I'm coming," Mason said. "That's what it means. That's what it's always meant." He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back. "But I need to know what we're actually walking into before I put more of my people in front of it. Because Peso's right. This isn't a missing kid situation. This is something that has reach I haven't seen before, and I need to understand it before I commit 6 men to standing in front of it." Ryder understood that. He did. He'd made that same calculation in other contexts, with other people's lives as the currency. He knew exactly what Mason was doing and why it was correct, and why it was also, at this specific moment, unbearable. "I'll go to Tucson alone," he said. "Get the laptop. Come back. Then we figure out what's on it and what it means and where we go from there. And while you're in Tucson, you keep her here. 6 of us and Dex against—" "Yes." Mason looked at him for a long time. The shop was quiet. Coffee was ready, the small burner clicking as it cooled. Outside, the desert was fully bright now, the morning having committed to itself. Mason said, "Peso leaves." "Okay." "Not because I don't trust him, because I'm not going to ask him to commit to something he's already said he's not—" "I know. It's okay." "It's not okay." Something crossed Mason's face. The thing he carried, the specific weight that came from leadership, from being the man who decided and then lived with the deciding. None of this is okay. I want to be clear about that. He looked at Ryder. None of this is okay, and we're doing it anyway. Ryder nodded. Go get the laptop, Mason said. Don't use any card, any phone call, anything traceable. Borrow Peso's bike. It's not connected to anything. Be back before dark. Before dark, Ryder said. Thought. Lena did not want to stay. She said so plainly, without drama, sitting in the back room with her backpack and her ancient eyes, looking at him with the specific expression of someone who had been making decisions about their own survival for 4 days and was not excited about surrendering that agency to someone else's plan. I'll be gone 4 hours, Ryder said. You don't know that. Probably 4 hours. And if something happens to you? He looked at her. Mason will keep you safe. Mason doesn't know me. He came last night. He sat down on the cot, bringing himself to her level. He drove through the night because I asked him to. That's who he is. Lena looked at the wall. She was processing. He could see it, the way you could see it in her, the information going through that careful interior machine. What if they come back, those men? Then Mason and 5 road wolves are between them and you. Are they good fighters? He thought about the right answer to that. They're veterans. They've been in hard situations before. That's not the same as answering. No, he said. It isn't. He looked at her. They're the best people I know for this. That's the honest answer. She considered that. Her hands were in her lap, absolutely still. My mom said honest answers were worth more than comfortable ones. She was right. Okay. A beat. Okay, I'll stay. Another beat. But you have to take the paper. The paper... She reached into the front pocket of her backpack and produced the folded piece of paper, the one with Carol's number and the laptop's hiding place, and the password and the underlined "Do not trust police." She held it out to him. You already told me the location, he said. I know, but... She held it out still. Take it anyway, in case you forget. He took it. He put it in his jacket pocket, same pocket as his phone and Mason's message. He stood up. Ryder? He looked back. She was sitting on the cot with her backpack and her constellation pattern and her 7-year-old hands, and she looked for just a moment like exactly what she was, a child who had lost her mother 4 days ago and had not had a single moment to be a child about it. Come back, she said. He held that. Yeah, he said. I will. But Peso left without fanfare, which was the only way Peso did anything. He handed Ryder the keys to his Softail, a gunmetal gray 2017 that had none of the chrome vanity of a show bike and all of the mechanical precision of a machine that had been maintained by a man who treated it as a professional tool, and said only, "Don't scratch it." Then he walked to his truck, which was a different vehicle from the bikes, and drove north, and was gone. Ryder watched him go. He had known Peso for 9 years and understood him in the way you understood men who communicated through what they didn't say, through the quality of their silences, the specific things they chose not to push. Peso had said his piece, and then he had stepped back, which was not abandonment and was not cowardice. It was a man understanding the limits of what he could carry and being honest about them. He thought about whether he respected that or resented it, and the answer was both, and he put both of them somewhere useful and got on the bike. The ride to Tucson took 2 hours and 20 minutes on roads that were still wet from the night storm. He took state routes, staying off the interstate, watching his mirrors with the consistent half-attention of a man who had been doing it long enough that it was no longer surveillance, just breathing. The desert moved past him in its stripped-down November version, muted colors, the Ocotillo bare, the saguaros standing in the pale light like figures in a story about patience. He thought about Claire Hart on this same road, not 4 days ago, months ago, a year ago, 8 months of building something that cost her everything. He tried to reconstruct the shape of it from what he had, the source inside the task force, the financial records, the names, whatever was on those USB drives that Frank had brought in the small hours, his face never visible to a 7-year-old watching from the hallway. The kind of story that killed you was specific. He'd known journalists in the Middle East, embedded reporters who covered combat and then went home and covered corruption and then got quiet in the ways that meant they were covering something worse. He'd known what those stories looked like from the outside: the nervous energy, the late nights, the sources who communicated in fragments, the specific way the journalists started watching doors. Claire Hart had watched doors. She had taught her daughter to watch them, and in the end, the door had found her anyway. He pulled off the highway once, near Marana, because he wanted to see it, the stretch of I-10 where they said she'd lost control. A single-vehicle accident. It was a long, straight section, slightly banked, the kind of road where a driver who'd been on it 1,000 times would have been on autopilot. The kind of road where forcing a vehicle off course would look like an accident if it was done correctly. He looked at it for a minute. Then he got back on the bike. Barrio Hollywood was a neighborhood that had been half gentrified for 15 years and had settled into a permanent state of in-between. New coffee shops beside tire shops, renovated craftsman bungalows across from houses that hadn't been painted since the 90s. The streets were quiet at this hour. Mid-morning, the school run finished, the working people at work. He parked 2 blocks from Claire's address and walked. The house was small, well-kept, with a desert garden in front, brittle bush and penstemon, and a palo verde that had lost most of its leaves to the season. The kind of garden maintained by someone who cared about where they lived and had thought about it deliberately rather than defaulting to grass. He went around to the side. The gate was a wrought iron panel, chest-high, latched from the inside with a mechanism that had, as Lena had described, developed a looseness in the latch tongue that allowed it to be moved from outside with just enough upward pressure. He had it open in 4 seconds. He closed it behind him. The side passage was narrow, the wall of the house on one side and a wooden fence on the other. He moved through it to the backyard. A concrete patio, a rusted outdoor table, a bird feeder that was empty. The back of the house had a kitchen window. He found the spot, the specific angle of frame that Lena had described. Lifted. The window moved. He was inside in 30 seconds. The kitchen smelled of the particular absence that empty houses develop quickly. Not decay, not neglect, just the withdrawal of living. A coffee mug was still in the sink. A child's drawing was on the refrigerator. A house, 2 figures, the taller one with a bubble above her head that said "Mommy" in careful printing. He stood still for a moment, moved. The back bedroom was the office, which he knew from Lena's description. A desk, bookshelves, the specific organized chaos of a working journalist's research space, file folders labeled in a system he didn't have time to decode, a desktop monitor. No laptop in sight. He went to the desk. Bottom drawer, left side. Locked. Of course locked. He thought about the key and then thought about where a person like Claire Hart would keep a key to a desk drawer in her own home office, and decided it would be close but not obvious. He checked the underside of the desk, the top drawer, the small ceramic bowl of office clips, and rubber bands on the desk surface. Nothing. He stood back and looked at the room. His eye went to the bookshelf. Not the books. The things between the books. A small succulent in a clay pot. A framed photograph of Lena at some younger age, maybe 4, laughing at something outside the frame. A folded piece of paper tucked between 2 binders. He unfolded the paper. It was a key. He opened the drawer. The laptop was there, along with a manila envelope, sealed, with 1 word on the front in black marker: Lena. He took both. He was closing the drawer when he heard the front door. Not a knock. Not a bell. The sound of a key in a lock. Competent, practiced. The specific sound of someone who had made entry to this house before. He was across the room and behind the door in the 3 seconds before it opened, moving the way training moved him. No thought, just position. A man came in. He was in his 60s, gray-bearded, moving with the slightly careful gait of someone managing an old knee injury. He was dressed plainly, work shirt, jeans, boots. He carried nothing in his hands. He crossed the kitchen and went directly to the office door and pushed it open. He stopped when he saw Ryder. They looked at each other for a very long moment. The man said, "You're not one of them." "No," Ryder said. "Then who are you?" "Who are you?" A pause. The man looked at the laptop under Ryder's arm, the sealed envelope. Something in his face, relief, complicated by fear, complicated by something else. "I'm Frank," he said. "I'm Frank Doyle." They sat in Claire's kitchen at Claire's table with Claire's coffee mug still in the sink and the child's drawing still on the refrigerator, and Francis Doyle told him enough to make everything worse. He was methodical about it, in the way of a man who had been organizing this information in his head for a very long time and was now delivering it to someone who needed the complete version, not the reassuring one. He'd been inside the system for 23 years, he said, the last 4 in a federal task force nominally dedicated to human trafficking interdiction. He'd started noticing things in year 2. By year 3, he understood what he was looking at. By year 4, he'd found Claire Hart. "Not because she found me," he said, "because I found her. Because she was the only journalist in the Southwest who had the track record and the—" He stopped. Something moved in his face. The courage to do something with what I had to give her. "What did you have?" Ryder said. "Names, financial records, a routing structure that connected private contractors." He looked at the table. The task force wasn't fighting the network. It was protecting it, providing surveillance advance notice, making sure certain operations never resulted in prosecutions. A pause. The people running it weren't some outside criminal organization. They were another pause. Longer. They were people whose names you would recognize, people in positions that made them seem untouchable. "Who's running the private contractors?" Ryder said. Doyle looked at him. Something calculated in his eyes. Not distrust exactly, but the specific caution of a man who had watched what happened to people who gave information to the wrong person. "Who sent you for the laptop?" "Lena." A long pause. "Lena sent you. She's safe. For now." Doyle closed his eyes for a moment, opened them. "She looks like her mother," he said. Not to Ryder specifically, to the room, to the coffee mug in the sink. "The contractors," Ryder said. "A man named Harlan Voss," Doyle said. "He runs a private security firm called Meridian Group out of McLean, Virginia. Publicly, they do government contract security work. Privately," he stopped. "Voss has been running logistics for the network for 7 years. He knows every name on Claire's list. He knows what's on that laptop. And he has federal cover, which means whatever he's doing out here has sanction from someone who can make it go away." Ryder sat with that. "The man who came to the diner last night," he said. "30s, silver gray jacket." "That sounds like Yates," Doyle said immediately. "Daniel Yates, former Special Operations, now Meridian. He's—" Something crossed his face. "He's the one who handled Claire's accident." The kitchen was very quiet. "She knew," Doyle said. "She knew they'd made her. She called me the morning before. She was supposed to send me the final file, the compilation, everything." He looked at his hands. "She never sent it. They got to her first. But she must have found a way to—" "The laptop," Ryder said. "It has everything. Every document, every name, the financial routing, the source recordings." He looked up. "If that gets to the right people—" "Who are the right people?" Ryder said. "You just told me the task force is compromised. Law enforcement is compromised. Who's left?" Doyle said, "There's a federal prosecutor in Phoenix, Dana Kim. She's not connected to the task force. She's been building a parallel case for 2 years. Not the same case, but adjacent. She needs what's on that laptop to—" He stopped. "She needs it to survive long enough to use it, which means she needs to know that someone with reach is protecting it." Ryder thought about Mason, about Garrett, about 5 road wolves in a mechanic's shop outside of Ashfork, standing between a little girl and people with government cover. He stood up, put the laptop under his arm, the sealed envelope in his jacket. "You need to come with me," he said. Doyle looked at him. "They'll be watching this house." "Then we don't go out the front." A pause. Then Doyle stood with the careful management of the old knee injury and looked at the room, the kitchen, the mug, the drawing on the refrigerator. The look of a man who had spent months in this house and was looking at it for possibly the last time. "She was the most—" He stopped, started again. "She was the best journalist I've ever known." Ryder said nothing. There wasn't anything to say to that. They went out through the kitchen window. was 40 minutes out of Tucson, Doyle following in his own vehicle on a route Ryder had given him that avoided every major surveillance camera cluster Ryder could mentally map, when his phone buzzed. Mason. He pulled over. The text was 5 words. 5 words that rearranged the architecture of the next several hours in a way that Ryder felt in his chest before he finished reading them. Garrett made a call. Compromised. He read it twice. Looked at the road. Looked at the desert. Garrett, who had been in Mason's corner since before Ryder joined the club, who had driven through the night and stood in that shop and said, "We're already in it." Garrett, who had a situation in Kingman, Mason had said, "Federal review, pending," and who would have known, when the morning clarified the situation, exactly how much exposure he was carrying. Garrett had called someone, and whoever he'd called had told someone else, which meant the location was no longer secure, which meant Mason was sitting in a mechanic's shop outside of Ash Fork with a 7-year-old girl in a compromised position and whatever was coming next. Ryder called back. Mason answered on the first ring. "Garrett," Ryder said. "Gone. He took his bike about an hour ago, said he needed air, left his phone." A pause. The weight of it enormous. "I didn't—" Another pause. "I didn't see it coming." "Where's Lena?" "Here. She's fine. She's—" The sound of Mason moving. A door. The outside air. "She heard us talking about Garrett, and she asked me directly if someone told on us, and I told her yes, and she said—" He stopped. "What did she say?" "She said her mom told her that the most dangerous people were always the ones who were scared of losing something." Ryder sat on the side of the road in the desert and held his phone and felt the specific terrible clarity of a moment when there is no more time for any of the conversations that should have happened before this. "How long do we have?" he said. "I don't know." A beat. "Maybe not long." He thought about the laptop under the seat, about Doyle in a vehicle behind him, about Dana Kim in Phoenix and Francis Doyle's USB drives, and Claire Hart's 8 months of the most important story she'd ever written. He thought about a little girl in a mechanic's shop watching a door. He thought about what it meant that Garrett, solid, scarred, 11 years in, had made a call. If Garrett could break, anyone could. And in that specific moment of desert clarity, Ryder Kane understood something he hadn't let himself understand until now. There was no clean version of this. There was no scenario where they handed Lena off to the right people and walked away. The right people were compromised. The system that was supposed to protect her was the system that had killed her mother. They were it. 5 road wolves and a broken former Marine sniper and a former federal agent with a bad knee, standing between a 7-year-old girl and people with government cover and private assets and the particular ruthlessness of men who had decided that survival required no witnesses. He said, "I'm bringing someone else. Former federal. He's the source." Mason absorbed that. "Okay." "Mason." "Yeah. I'm sorry for pulling you into—" "Don't." The word was flat and immediate. "Don't do that. You know better." A pause. "Get back here. We'll figure out the next piece when you're back." He ended the call. He sat for one more moment on the desert roadside, the soft tail ticking under him, the sky enormous and pale above the scrubland, the kind of sky that didn't care about any of this, that had been this wide and this indifferent long before any of the people in this story were born and would be long after. He thought about Lena's face when she'd said, "Come back." He pulled back onto the road. 40 minutes. He could be back in 40 minutes, and then whatever was coming, he would be between it and her, and that was the only calculation that mattered. He did not see the vehicle that had been following him at distance for the last 20 miles. Staying 3 corners back, professional interval, the kind of following that doesn't look like following unless you know exactly what you're looking at. He did not see it pull out from behind a stand of mesquite and close the distance when he accelerated. He didn't see it. But when he came around the long curve outside of Cordis Junction and saw the black SUV sitting sideways across both lanes of the state road, engine running, 2 men out, a third in the vehicle, he understood, with the cold and total certainty of a man who had been in the field long enough to know the difference between bad luck and architecture, that this had not been. The SUV was sideways across both lanes with the deliberate geometry of a roadblock designed by professionals, not law enforcement, who left room on the shoulder, but people who had done this before in places where the shoulder didn't matter, and the law was a concept that applied to other situations. 2 men stood in front of it. The third stayed in the vehicle. All 3 of those details were information. Ryder had 3 seconds from recognition to response. He used them. He didn't brake. He accelerated. Not toward the SUV, but toward the 8-inch gap between the SUV's rear bumper and the guardrail on the right side. The gap that existed because the men who positioned it had measured for a truck and not for a motorcycle. The gap that was exactly wide enough for the Softail if he committed completely and did not reconsider at any point in the next 2 seconds. He went through it at 47 miles an hour, close enough to the guardrail that the mirror clipped it and spun off, close enough to the SUV's bumper that he felt the heat of its exhaust on his left leg. He heard shouting behind him, not gunfire, which told him something. They wanted him alive, or they wanted the laptop, or both. He rode. In the mirror, the SUV was turning, taking time to turn because it was a large vehicle on a narrow road, and turning required distance, and every second of distance was a second he wasn't caught. He ran through the math. They had a radio or phones. They knew his general destination. They were ahead of him on the logic, if not the road. He pulled off on the first fire road he found, unmarked, unpaved, running west into scrubland, and killed the engine. Sat in the sudden silence. The desert was completely still, the kind of still that had weight. A hawk somewhere overhead, circling. The distant sound of the SU-5 on the state road, moving fast, passing his position without slowing. They hadn't seen him turn. He gave it 3 minutes, counted them. Then he pulled out his phone and called the number Doyle had given him. Doyle answered on the first ring, breathing hard. I saw them set up. I pulled off before the curve. You're clear? For now. A pause. Breathing. They made you at some point between Tucson and here. Either a traffic camera or Garrett's call included my direction of travel. He said it flatly. No anger in it yet. The anger was there somewhere, but it was behind a locked door and he didn't have time for it. The laptop, Doyle said. I've got it? A long exhale. Okay. The sound of a man reconstructing a plan. There's a secondary route. It adds 40 minutes. Give it to me. Doyle gave it to him. He memorized it, the way he memorized everything important. Not by writing it down, but by running it through twice, building the geography in his body the way bodies learn roads. When you get to the shop, Doyle said, tell Mason to move her. The location is burned. I know. And Ryder. A pause. Be careful with what's on that laptop. When you open it, he stopped himself. What? A longer pause. Just be careful, Doyle said. Some of what's there, it's not just names and records. There's testimony, recorded testimony. A beat. Some of it involves people you might not expect. He held that. People like who? Open it first. Then call me. The line went quiet. He sat on the fire road for another minute, the hawk still circling, the scrubland absolutely indifferent. Then he started the Softail and went west and then north on the route Doyle had given him, through the raw afternoon, carrying the laptop like an unexploded thing. The shop was wrong before he even got through the door. He felt it in the lot. The arrangement of the bikes, 3 where there had been 6. Garrett's absence confirmed and accounted for, but 2 others also missing. He felt it in the silence from inside, a silence with a different texture than the one he'd left, a silence that had been through something. He pushed through the door. Mason was at the workbench. A cut above his eyebrow, dried dark. His jacket was open. He was holding a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. Dex was in the back corner with his arms crossed, his expression the specific configuration of a man who had done what was necessary and was now living in the aftermath of it. A man Ryder didn't recognize was zip-tied to a chair in the center of the shop floor. Mid-30s, dark jacket, the haircut and posture of private contracted work. His right eye was swollen shut. He was breathing through his mouth. Lena was not in the room. She's in the back, Mason said before Ryder could ask. She's fine. She's... A pause. She's better than fine, actually. She's the one who heard them coming. Ryder looked at the man in the chair. He came alone, Mason said. Or he came as the advance. Either way, he's here. Ryder looked at him for another moment. Then he set the laptop on the workbench, set the sealed envelope beside it, and crossed to the man in the chair and crouched down to his level. The man looked at him with his one functioning eye. No fear in it, exactly. More like the managed tension of someone who was calculating how much information to trade and for what. Meridian Group, Ryder said. Something moved in the man's face. Yates send you? Silence. You don't have to answer that, Ryder said. I already know the answer. What I want to know is the timeline. The man said nothing. Ryder stood up, looked at Mason. How long has he been here? 40 minutes. He say anything? A few things. Mason put the coffee cup down. He said we should walk away. That we don't understand what we're in the middle of. A beat. He said the girl wasn't our problem. Ryder looked at the man again. She's not your problem either. She's a 7-year-old who lost her mother. The man's jaw tightened. Someone you know did that, Ryder said. Someone you work with or work for put a car off the I-10 with a woman in it. And now you're in a chair. He crouched again, bringing himself eye level. So I need you to tell me how much time we have before the rest of them get here. A long silence. Then the man said, You won't make it to Phoenix. That's not an answer. It is an answer. His voice was level, controlled. You think you're holding a position. You're not. You're in a box and the box is closing, and... He stopped, looked at the floor. Something moved in his face, not guilt, but something adjacent to it, something that had been trained out of him but was still there in the substrate. The girl can't testify. You understand that? It doesn't matter what's on the laptop. Without a protected chain of custody and a secured witness, That's not your call, Ryder said. I'm telling you how it works. I know how it works. He stood. I spent 8 years doing field work in places where it worked exactly like that. Men with resources making decisions about what counted as evidence and what didn't, about who was a witness and who was a liability. He looked at the man steadily. That's why I'm not interested in how it works. The man looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, 2 hours, maybe less. There's a full team moving from Flagstaff. Ryder turned to Mason. Mason was already moving. Iban. They moved Lena to the back of Dex's personal truck, an older GMC registered to a business name that had nothing to do with Dex's legal identity, the way a lot of things in Dex's life had nothing to do with his legal identity. She came out of the back room with her backpack and her constellation pattern, and her ancient eyes took in the man in the chair with one measured look and said nothing. She climbed into the truck. She pulled the seatbelt across her lap. Ryder opened the laptop at the workbench. The password worked. Lena 2016. The desktop was sparse, organized, the desktop of a woman who thought about workspace the way she thought about everything, deliberately, with purpose. A folder labeled MG-Final sat in the center of the screen like an accusation. He opened it. The folder contained 47 files, documents, audio recordings, spreadsheets, 2 video files. He opened the first video. It was a recording from what appeared to be a hotel room. Stationary camera, bad angle, the quality of something recorded covertly on a device positioned on a shelf or inside a bag. 2 men at a table. One of them was talking. The other was listening. Ryder recognized the second man in the 5th second of the recording. He stopped the video. He backed it up. Watched those 5 seconds again. He was aware of Mason standing behind him, having crossed the shop silently to look over his shoulder. He was aware of Dex in the doorway. He was aware of the man in the chair somewhere behind him, breathing through his mouth. He watched the 5 seconds a third time. The second man at the table was in his 60s, gray suit. The kind of face that appeared on certain kinds of official materials, federal materials, the kind with seals and letterheads. Ryder had seen that face before. Not in person. In the specific context of news items, press conferences, the background of photographs from events at which important people appeared. The name that went with that face was the name of the deputy director of the agency that nominally oversaw the task force that Francis Doyle had worked inside for 4 years. The name of the man who was supposed to be fighting the network. who was in the 5 seconds of hotel room footage that Claire Hart had obtained from a source who had risked everything to provide it, sitting at a table and calmly accepting a document that Ryder did not need to read to understand the nature of. He closed the laptop. The shop was completely silent. Then Mason said, very quietly, "Is that who I think it is?" "Yes." Another silence. "She had this for how long?" Mason said. "Don't know. Long enough to die for it." He turned around. The man in the chair was looking at the closed laptop with an expression that had changed. The calculation was still there, but something else had appeared beneath it. Something that might have been, in a different man in a different situation, the first movement toward a crisis of conscience. "You knew," Ryder said. The man didn't answer. "You knew what you were protecting." "I knew what the job was," the man said. His voice had changed too, flattened. "I didn't know the—" He stopped. "I didn't ask what the top looked like." "That's a choice," Ryder said. "Yes." A pause. "It is." The room held that. Ryder picked up his phone and called Doyle. Doyle answered immediately. "You opened it." "I saw the video." Silence on the line. "Doyle." "I know." His voice was exhausted. The exhaustion of a man who had been carrying something enormous for a very long time and had not put it down. "I'm sorry I didn't prepare you better. I didn't know how to—" He stopped. It changes everything. It changes who you can trust, who you can go to, what Dana Kim can actually do with it. Because if it goes through official channels and someone in those channels is— "I understand the problem," Ryder said. "The only way it works," Doyle said, "is if it goes wide. Not to one prosecutor, not to one office, to multiple simultaneously, media and legal at the same time, so there's no single point where it can be intercepted or suppressed." A pause. Claire had a plan for that. She had a list of outlets, a timing sequence. It's in the folder, a file called distribution. He opened the laptop again, found the file. It was exactly what Doyle described. 12 names, 12 organizations, a sequenced release plan, the kind of architecture that a journalist building toward the biggest story of her career would construct for exactly the contingency that had occurred, the contingency of not being there to release it herself. He thought about Claire Hart building this distribution list, naming the outlets, sequencing the releases, preparing for her own absence from the story she'd given her life to. He thought about a woman sitting at this laptop in her house in Barrio Hollywood while her daughter slept down the hall, planning for the world in which she wasn't there to finish the work. He thought about the drawing on the refrigerator. 2 figures. Mommy. He said, "We need to move." Wasn't. He cut the zip tie himself. The man in the chair, whose name, he'd eventually said, was Cruz, sat still while the tie was cut and rubbed his wrists without drama. He stood up. He looked at Ryder with his one functioning eye and the other one swollen, that tracked at a different angle. "I can help you," Cruz said, "with the route, with what they're bringing." "Why?" Ryder said. Cruz looked at the closed laptop. He looked at the floor. He looked at the door to the back of the shop, behind which a 7-year-old girl was sitting in a truck with a Constellation backpack. "Because I have a daughter," he said. "She's 9. The room didn't move. "I'm not—" Cruz stopped, started again. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to use me." Ryder looked at Mason. Mason looked at Cruz for a long time, in the specific way Mason looked at people when he was reading them. Not the surface, not the presentation, but the thing underneath, the part that the training couldn't fully cover. Mason had been reading people for 30 years in situations where being wrong was not an academic failure. "Tell us the route," Mason said. Cruz told them. There were 2 teams, he said. The Flagstaff team was the one he'd reported as 2 hours out. 6 men in 2 vehicles, standard interdiction setup. But there was a second team, a smaller one, that Cruz had not been authorized to brief him on and had found out about by accident through a communication fragment he wasn't supposed to see. This second team had been in position since the previous night, not moving, not active, waiting near Flagstaff, waiting near the address of Carol Reyes. Ryder felt the specific cold of that information travel from the base of his skull down through his spine. They weren't just tracking Lena, they were tracking where Lena was trying to go. They had gotten to the destination before the person they were hunting because they understood the logic of the situation well enough to know that a 7-year-old girl running from the people who killed her mother would eventually try to reach the only family she had left. They had been watching Carol Reyes's house for how long? How long has the second team been on the Aunt? Ryder said. Cruz hesitated. Cruz. 3 days, Cruz said. 3 days. Since before Lena got on the bus, since before the diner, which meant they'd known about Carol Reyes before the accident, which meant they had Claire's complete personal network mapped before they moved on her, which meant Carol Reyes was already compromised, possibly already. He crossed to the back door in 4 steps and pulled it open. Lena was in the truck, seatbelt on, backpack on her knees. She looked up when the door opened, looked at his face. She read it. He watched her read it, and he watched what happened in her face when she did. The initial flinch, small, barely there, and then the door closing, the same door that had been closing all week, the one she'd learned to close because breaking down was a luxury the situation had not given her. Carol, she said, I don't know yet. But maybe. He crouched down beside the truck. We're going to find out, but we need to move first. If they got to her, Lena stopped. Something moved through her, something enormous and tectonic. She's the last person I... She stopped again. He put his hand on her arm, not saying anything, just there. She sent me a text, Lena said, 3 days ago, before I got on the bus. She said she was waiting for me. A pause. She said the guest room was ready. He held that, held her arm. The morning light came through the truck window and lay across the Constellation backpack, and Lena's small hands, and all of it felt, in this specific moment, unbearable in the way that true things sometimes felt. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just true and heavy, and requiring to be carried. We're going to be okay, he said. She looked at him, those eyes. You don't know that. No, he said, I don't. She looked at him for another moment. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and handed him something. A USB drive, small, black, unmarked. What is this? He said. Mom gave it to me 2 weeks ago. She said if something happened and I couldn't get to Carol, I should give it to the first person I trusted. A pause. She said I'd know who that was. Another pause. I trust you. He looked at the drive. He looked at her. She said it was a backup, Lena said. She said it was the most important backup. He held the drive in his palm and thought about what most important backup meant in the context of everything else on that laptop. The 47 files, the hotel room footage, the distribution list, the testimony that had already killed one person and was currently in the process of trying to kill several more. If that was the primary and this was the backup. He looked up at Mason, who had followed him to the door. Mason said, "Second drive." "Yeah." "Separate from the laptop." "Yeah." Ryder looked at it. "Which means if the laptop gets taken, this still exists." Mason's voice was completely flat. "Which means they need both." Ryder closed his hand around the drive. "She planned for this," he said. Not to Mason, not to anyone. Just into the air of the shop, toward the absent woman who had planned for her own death with the same methodical precision she'd brought to her 8 months of work. Every contingency, every backup, she planned for this. "She was good at her job," Lena said quietly. He looked at her. "She always said that," Lena said. "When I asked her why she worked so much, she said, 'I'm good at my job, and my job matters.'" Her hands tightened around the backpack. She was right about both. He stood, pocketed the drive. "We move in 5 minutes." He went back into the shop. Doyle was on the phone, outside the building, visible through the window, pacing the small perimeter of the lot with the focused energy of a man coordinating things that required coordination. Dex was methodically loading a bag with items from the shop that Ryder understood instinctively to be the kind of items a former Army medic kept prepared for situations like this. Not weapons, not surveillance equipment, but the things you needed when people got hurt. And there was no ambulance in the calculation. Cruz was standing by the workbench, rubbing his wrists. He looked at Ryder. "The route they're taking from Flagstaff," Ryder said. "They'll assume we try to run south, Phoenix, or back toward the border." Yes. So we don't go south. Cruz looked at him. Where do you go? Phoenix, Ryder said. A pause. That's south. Not the way you think, Ryder said. Not the route they've mapped, not the roads they're watching. Mason came up beside him. There's a way through the Verde Valley. Old ranch roads, mostly unpaved. Adds 2 hours. They won't be on it, Ryder said. They shouldn't be on it. Mason's jaw set. That's a different thing. Yes, it is. Ryder looked at him. I know. A silence between them. The history of it. 11 years, a parking lot in San Diego, 100 decisions made in rooms with bad options. Mason looked at him with the specific expression he wore when he had already made a decision and was watching Ryder arrive at the same place. The club, Ryder said. This costs... Stop. Mason's voice was quiet, absolute. Don't tell me what it costs. I know what it costs. He looked at the closed laptop, at the door to the lot where Lena sat in Dex's truck. I've been doing this since before you knew what a Harley was. I know the difference between a problem and a reason. He looked at Ryder. She's a reason. Ryder held that. Doyle came back through the door, pocketing his phone, his face carrying new information. He looked at Ryder, and his eyes said that the information was not good before his mouth confirmed it. Carol Reyes, Doyle said. Every person in the room went still. She's alive, Doyle said immediately, because he could read the room. She's alive, but... He stopped, looked at the door to the lot, toward the truck, lowered his voice. She's been under surveillance for 72 hours. Active surveillance, not passive. Her phone is compromised. Her home is covered. She may have been approached, possibly pressured. I have a contact trying to reach her through a back channel, but it's... He stopped again. I don't know what she knows or what she's been told or whether she's still on our side, Mason said. Whether she's intact, Doyle said carefully. People under that kind of pressure make choices. I'm not saying she... We don't know, Ryder said. We don't know. He looked at the door to the lot again. He thought about Lena saying the guest room was ready. He thought about the last person, the last family, the last coordinate in a little girl's map of a world that kept contracting. He thought about what it would cost Lena to lose that too. And then Cruz said from the corner of the shop, in the voice of a man who was past the point of calculating what it cost him to say it, there's something else. Every head turned. Cruz had his eyes on the floor. His hands, no longer zip-tied, were at his sides, completely still. Garrett, he said, the man who called. What about him? Mason said. He didn't call Yates. He didn't call the Flagstaff team. Cruz looked up. His one functioning eye was steady. He called a number that routes to the deputy director's office. The shop went completely silent. He called the top, Ryder said. He called directly to the source, Cruz said, which means... He stopped. Which means he didn't just sell the location. He was already... He looked at Mason. I'm sorry. He was already in contact, before last night, before the diner. A pause. I've seen the log. Garrett's number appears in the deputy director's contact record 4 times in the last 6 weeks. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Ryder looked at Mason. Mason was looking at the floor. He was standing completely still, the stillness of a man absorbing a blow that he was not going to allow to put him on the ground, because he had been absorbing blows for 30 years, and he had learned the hard way, every time, that going to the ground was a choice. His face was closed, his jaw was set, his hands were at his sides and completely still. 6 weeks, Mason said. Yes. Mason stopped. He looked at the wall. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at nothing in particular, which was the look of a man going somewhere internal that nobody else in the room could follow him. He was at the table when we decided to come. A pause. He argued for it. Nobody said anything. He argued for coming, Mason said. He said we were already in it. Yes, Ryder said. He wanted us here. A pause. He wanted all of us in one place. He said it without inflection, without the anger or the grief or the betrayal that Ryder could see it cost him, that was visible in the set of his shoulders and the particular quality of his stillness. Mason Crow, who had built the road wolves on the specific principle that your brothers were the one thing in the world you could trust when everything else proved untrustworthy, standing in a mechanic's shop in the Arizona desert, absorbing the information that the architecture he'd built his adult life on had been breached from the inside for 6 weeks by a man he'd driven through the night to stand beside. Ryder put his hand on Mason's shoulder. Mason didn't move, didn't speak, just breathed in and out the specific controlled rhythm of a man keeping himself together by force of habit. Then he picked up his coffee cup, which was cold, and drank what was left in it and put it down and said, "How many people know we're here right now?" "Garrett," Ryder said, "and whoever Garrett told. Which is the deputy director? Which is Voss? Which is Yates?" Mason set the cup down. "Which is everyone who matters." "Yes." 2 hours, Mason said. Cruz said 2 hours. "Less now," Cruz said quietly. Mason looked at Ryder. The expression on his face was one that Ryder had seen twice before in 11 years. In a hospital waiting room in San Diego and on a desert highway in Nevada at 3 a.m, after a club member had made a choice that cost him everything. The expression of a man standing at the exact point where the map ran out and the terrain became something you navigated by instinct or not at all. "Verde Valley route," Mason said. "Yes." 3 bikes, the truck. Dex drives Lena. You ride with the laptop. "And Doyle?" "Doyle follows." He looked at Cruz. "You're coming with us." Cruz blinked. "Why?" "Because you're the only one in this room who knows what Yates is bringing," Mason said. "And because you've got a 9-year-old daughter, which means you've just decided whose side you're on." He looked at him steadily. "You may not know that yet, but you have." Cruz looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the door, at the truck in the lot visible through the small window, the tail of Lena's Constellation backpack just visible above the door panel. He said nothing. He picked up his jacket. Outside, the sound of Mason's road wolves starting their bikes. 3 Harleys, the specific deep percussion of engines that had covered enough miles to have personalities. The sound that meant moving. That meant the decision was made and the road was next, and there was no more time for anything that wasn't forward. Ryder picked up the laptop, pocketed the USB drive, picked up the sealed envelope with Lena written on it in black marker, the one he hadn't opened, the one Claire Hart had addressed to her daughter, the one he had been carrying since Tucson without opening because some things were not his to open. He stood in the shop for one more second. He thought about Claire Hart. He thought about a woman who had known, in the last weeks of her life, exactly what she was doing and exactly what it cost and had done it anyway. Not because she was unafraid, but because the alternative, leaving the story unfinished, leaving the names unnamed, leaving the network intact, was a cost she was not willing to pay. He walked out of the shop into the cold morning air and got on the bike. The Verde Valley route was exactly what Mason had described, unpaved for long stretches, running through scrubland and dry creek beds and the kind of terrain that existed on paper maps, but not on the ones that surveillance teams pulled up on laptops in black SUVs. It was also rough enough that the truck carrying Lena moved at 40 miles an hour maximum, which meant 2 hours became 2.5, which meant every minute of that time was a minute the Flagstaff team was also moving. They rode without conversation. 3 Harleys and a truck and Doyle's sedan, spread out enough to not read as a convoy on any aerial observation, but close enough that each vehicle was always in sight of the next. Ryder rode point, the laptop in a bag strapped across his chest, the USB drive in his jacket pocket against his sternum, where he could feel it with every breath. He thought about nothing. That was the discipline, the operational state, the one he'd trained for and then spent 11 years trying to leave behind and had never fully managed. Empty the signal, run on input and response. Don't think about Lena in the truck behind him. Don't think about Mason's face when he heard about Garrett. Don't think about Claire Hart at her laptop in the small hours while her daughter slept. Just ride. Just watch the road. Just get there. They were 40 minutes outside of Phoenix, on pavement again, the city's light pollution beginning to orange the horizon, when Cruz leaned forward in the truck's passenger seat and said, "They're not behind us." Dex driving said nothing. "They would have been on us by now if they were coming from Flagstaff," Cruz said. which means either they took the wrong route or, Dex said, or they're already there. Cruz was quiet for a long moment. Where's Kim's office? Dex said. Downtown Phoenix, Federal Building. They know that's where we're going? Cruz looked at his hands. If they know the full picture, what's on the laptop, the distribution plan, they know Dana Kim's name is on Claire's list. He paused. They've had days to position. In the back seat, Lena was awake. She had been awake for the last hour, watching the road ahead with the specific focus of a child who understood that the watching mattered. She said, without looking away from the windshield, "They're going to try to stop us before we get there." "Probably," Dex said. "So we don't go straight there," she said. Both men looked at her in the rear view. "That's what my mom would say," Lena said. "She always said the obvious route is the route they plan for." Dex picked up his radio and called Ryder. They pulled off at a truck stop on the eastern edge of the metro and sat in the lot with the engines running and worked it out in the cold. Ryder and Mason standing at the front of the truck, Cruz leaning against the hood, Doyle on the phone again, his breath making small clouds in the night air. The plan that emerged was not elegant. Elegant plans required time and resources and the luxury of controlling variables, and they had none of those things. What they had was a laptop, a USB drive, a distribution list built by a dead woman who had planned for exactly this contingency, and 6 people who were, for different reasons, past the point of being willing to stop. Dana Kim needed to receive the files simultaneously with the media contacts on Claire's list. That was the architecture. That was what made it work. The simultaneous release, the multiple vectors, the removal of any single point where it could be intercepted or suppressed. One journalist, one prosecutor. Those could be pressured, delayed, managed. 12 simultaneous, that was different. That was the story becoming the story before anyone could stop it being the story. They needed Wi-Fi. They needed 20 minutes. They needed to not be found for those 20 minutes. "Library," Lena said. Everyone looked at her. "Public library, downtown, public Wi-Fi. My mom used them sometimes when she needed to file from somewhere that wasn't her laptop's registered IP." She looked at Ryder. "She told me that." Mason said, "She told a 7-year-old about IP registration." "She told me lots of things," Lena said. Ryder looked at Mason. Mason looked at Ryder. Something passed between them that was past words. The specific communication of men who had been through enough together that the language between them had compressed to almost nothing. "Library?" Ryder said. They moved. The Phoenix Public Library's central branch closed at 9. It was 7:42. The parking structure adjacent to it had 3 levels and 2 exits, and enough civilian traffic that a truck and 2 motorcycles pulling in didn't read as anything. They left 1 bike outside, Garrett's replacement. A road wolf named Birch, who had joined them from a Phoenix contact an hour ago, said nothing to anyone, and positioned himself at the structure's entrance with the patient stillness of a man who had stood watch before. Dex stayed with Lena in the truck on the 2nd level. Doyle went to the library's main entrance to watch the street. Ryder and Mason went in. The librarian at the desk was a woman in her 50s who looked at 2 men in road wolves' cuts walking into her library at 7:43 on a Thursday night with the exact expression of a person deciding whether to be concerned. Mason nodded at her with the specific courtesy he extended to everyone who wasn't actively threatening him, which was everybody. She looked at them for 1 more second and went back to her terminal. They took a table in the back corner, away from the other patrons. A teenage girl doing homework, an old man with a newspaper, a young woman nursing coffee with her eyes closed. Ryder opened the laptop, connected to the public Wi-Fi, opened the distribution file. 12 names, 12 email addresses, encrypted sending instructions beside each, a compressed archive that Claire had prepared. The complete package, ready to go, needing only to be sent. He looked at Mason. Mason said, "Do it." He did it. It took 11 minutes. The archive was large. The Wi-Fi was adequate. He watched the progress indicators move with the specific focused patience of a man who had waited in worse places for more uncertain outcomes. And he did not look at the door because looking at the door was a thing he could not afford right now. And he did not think about what was happening outside. And he did not think about Lena in the truck on the second level with Dex, waiting. The last send completed at 7:59. He closed the laptop. He looked at Mason. Done. All 12? All 12. Kim's office, the Tribune, the AP, the 3 network contacts, the... Okay? Mason stood. Let's go. They were at the library's front door when Doyle came through it from the outside, moving faster than his knee usually allowed, his face carrying the specific information that Ryder had learned to read in faces that had no time to speak at first. Parking structure, Doyle said. 2 vehicles. They came in from the north entrance 2 minutes ago. Birch? Mason said. Still on the south exit. He doesn't know yet. How many? I counted 4. Could be more in the vehicles. Ryder thought about the second level. About Dex and Lena in the GMC sitting still, waiting. About what 4 men moving through a parking structure toward a truck with a 7-year-old in it looked like from the inside of that truck. He was already moving. Quote, the parking structure smelled of oil and cold concrete and the specific stillness of enclosed spaces at night. Ryder took the stairs, Mason behind him, 2 at a time, no sound. The discipline of men who had moved through bad spaces before and understood that noise was information given to the wrong people. Second level. He came through the stairwell door and saw it immediately. The GMC, 30 feet away, and between him and it, 2 men in dark jackets moving with the unhurried purpose of people who didn't know anyone was behind them. He covered the distance in 4 seconds. The first man heard him at 2 seconds and began to turn, and Ryder hit him before the turn completed. Not elegantly, not with any of the technical precision of the training, but with the complete physical commitment of a man who had one calculation, and it was not about himself. The man went down hard against the concrete pillar. The laptop bag swung wide, and Ryder caught it with his left hand without looking. The second man was faster. He had his weapon clearing the holster when Mason came from the right. And what happened in the next 3 seconds was the product of 2 men who had, between them, spent decades in situations that required exactly this. Fast, dirty, without hesitation, the specific brutality of people who fought not because they were violent by nature, but because something behind them was worth every cost in front of them. The weapon skidded across the concrete. Both men were down. Ryder got to the truck. Dex had it running. Had started it the moment he heard the stairwell door, because Dex was a man who understood preparation as a continuous condition rather than a discrete act. Lena was in the back seat, pressed against the far door, her backpack against her chest. She looked at Ryder when he opened the door, and her face did the thing it had been doing all week, absorbing, processing, closing the door on the part that was too much for right now. You okay? Ryder said. Yes? Her voice was completely steady. Are you bleeding? He looked down. His knuckles, split across 2 of them, were dripping onto the concrete. A little. Dex has a kit. I know. He looked at her for 1 more second. We have to move, right now. I know. She was already pulling the seatbelt across. Go. He got in the passenger seat. Mason came around the back of the truck at a run and got in the rear. Doyle's sedan was already moving at the far end of the level, heading for the south exit where Birch was standing. Dex drove. They came out of the structure into the Phoenix night. The city spread out around them, lit and enormous and indifferent, the kind of city that absorbed emergencies without noticing them, 10,000 things happening in every direction at once. Dex turned south, then east, then south again, the pattern of a man losing a tail without appearing to. Ryder's phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. He answered. A woman's voice. Controlled, precise, with the specific quality of someone accustomed to speaking in circumstances that required absolute clarity. Mr. Kane, my name is Donna Kim. I'm a federal prosecutor in the Phoenix district. I received a package 11 minutes ago that I believe came from you. A pause. I need to know if the source is secure. He looked at Lena in the rear view. The source is secure, he said. I need to know... She stopped, the sound of her on her end moving somewhere, a door closing. I need to know if the child is safe. He held the phone. The child is safe, he said. Another pause. There are people moving toward your position right now who are not law enforcement and do not have any legal sanction for what they're doing. I have exactly enough of what you sent me to begin an emergency filing, but I need—" She stopped again. "I need the original source material in a chain of custody that will hold. I need the drive, not just the files. I know what you need," Ryder said. "Can you get to me?" He looked at Mason. Mason was looking at the phone, listening. He held up 3 fingers. 3 road wolves, counting Birch, plus Dex, plus Doyle, plus Cruz, who was somewhere behind them in a vehicle he'd borrowed from the truck stop lot, and whose loyalty was a calculation Ryder had decided to make once and not revisit. He thought about what was between their current position and wherever Dana Kim was standing with her phone and her emergency filing and her 2 years of parallel case building that was waiting for exactly what Claire Hart had spent 8 months building toward. He thought about 2 vehicles coming into a parking structure from the north entrance and 4 men moving with purpose through the concrete dark. They had sent the files. That was done. It was out. It was moving. It was in the hands of 12 organizations simultaneously, and the architecture Claire Hart had built for exactly this moment was functioning exactly as she'd designed it to function. But Dana Kim was right. The files were the story. The drive was the evidence. Without the chain of custody, without the original source material authenticated, and in the hands of a federal prosecutor with standing, the story could be told, but the case couldn't be made. And the men whose names were in the hotel room footage would walk, and the network would reconstitute itself in a different shape with different names, and Claire Hart would have died for a news cycle rather than for a reckoning. "Where are you?" Ryder said. Kim gave him an address, not the federal building, a different address, residential, the kind of location a prosecutor used when she understood that her office was a known quantity and known quantities had already been accounted for. She was thinking like Claire Hart. He told Dex the address. Dex drove. They were 6 blocks away when the black SUV came out of a side street and fell in behind them. Not rushing, not aggressive, just there, 3 car lengths back, keeping pace with the specific patience of a vehicle that didn't need to hurry because it already knew where they were going. Mason looked out the rear window. 1. "I see it," Dex said. 1 visible, Ryder said. Not the same as 1. His phone buzzed again. Not Kim this time, a number he recognized. Birch. 2 more, Birch said, coming in from the north. They've got the address. I don't know how they have Kim's phone, Ryder said. Because of course they did. Because a woman who had been building a parallel case for 2 years against people with government cover and private contractors and the resources to put surveillance teams in the field overnight was also a woman whose communications had been monitored. And when she called Ryder's number 11 minutes ago from a phone that was already being tracked, she had given them everything they needed. He looked at Lena. She was watching him. Steady. Ancient. "It's okay," he said. "I know," she said. "How do you know?" he said. She looked at the road ahead, at the city lights, at the enormous indifferent Phoenix night. "Because you're still here," she said. "And you said you'd come back, and you did." He held that. Dex said very quietly, "We've got one behind us, 2 coming from the north, and 6 blocks to cover." He said it the way he said everything, with the flat informational quality of a man for whom facts were tools rather than sources of panic. "So," Mason's hand closed on Ryder's shoulder from the back seat. Not a grip of fear. A grip of something else. The specific contact between men who have made a choice and are standing in it. "So," Ryder said. He picked up his phone and called Birch. "I need you to do something," he said. "Right now. You and whoever else Mason can get to this address in the next 4 minutes." "What am I doing?" Birch said. Ryder looked at the SUV in the mirror, at the address on his phone, at Lena, who was watching him with her mother's eyes in her 7-year-old face, carrying a story that had already cost more than anyone should have had to pay. "You're going to make some noise," he said. The Harleys were already coming. He could hear them before he saw them, the specific deep percussion rising from the north, from 2 directions. The sound of road wolves responding to a call the way they always had, the way they always would. Because that was what the road wolves were. Not the thing people wrote about in newspapers, not the gangster cliché or the leather and chrome mythology, but men who had been broken by the world in specific ways and had built something from the breaking that was, in its essential nature, a wall. A wall between the hunters and the people inside. Between the dark and whoever was small and cornered and had nowhere left to go. The Harleys hit the intersection from two directions at once. Birch came from the north with two Phoenix area road wolves that Mason had called in the last 20 minutes. Men Ryder didn't know by name, but recognized by the specific way they moved, the way they positioned their bikes, the language of bodies that had been in hard situations before and had not been diminished by them. They came in fast and loud, which was the point. The noise a deliberate thing. The sound of engines designed to announce themselves filling the residential street and bouncing off the building faces and doing the one thing that professional contractors in unmarked vehicles did not want done to them, making the situation visible. The SUV behind them braked. The two vehicles coming from the north pulled up short. Dex drove through the gap. The address was a townhouse, middle of the block, anonymous, the kind of residential building that appeared in no official record connected to Dana Kim's name because a woman who had been building a case for 2 years against people with government reach did not keep her safe house in her own name. The door was open before they reached it. A man in the doorway, late 30s, plain clothes, the specific posture of a federal marshal who had been briefed and was not happy about any of it, but was doing his job. Dex stopped the truck. Ryder got out, opened the rear door. Lena climbed out with her backpack and stood on the sidewalk and looked at the open door and the man in it and the warm light coming from inside. And for a moment, just one, she looked exactly her age. 7 years old, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Standing on a sidewalk in Phoenix at night, having crossed 4 days of the worst kind of country a child should ever have to cross. Ryder put his hand on her shoulder. She reached up and put her hand over his. They went inside. Donna Kim was smaller than her voice suggested, compact, precise, with the focused energy of someone who ran on something more sustainable than adrenaline. She looked at Lena when they came in, and then looked at Ryder with an expression that contained several things at once. Professional assessment, gratitude, something that might have been sorrow if she'd allowed it full expression. She didn't allow it full expression. She had work to do. She took the laptop. She took the USB drive, and Ryder placed it in her hand, and she closed her fingers around it with the care of someone accepting something irreplaceable, which it was. She looked at the sealed envelope with Lena written on it, and at Lena standing beside Ryder, and she said, "That one's not mine." "No," Ryder said. He handed it to Lena. Lena looked at it for a long moment, her name in her mother's handwriting. The black marker, careful, deliberate. Claire Hart writing her daughter's name on an envelope in the small hours. One more contingency in the architecture of a woman who had planned for everything except being believed while she was still alive. Lena put it in her backpack. She zipped it closed. She would open it when she was ready, which might be tonight or might be months from now, and either way it was hers. Outside, the sound of engines, the Harleys holding their positions. Then, after a few minutes, the sound of different vehicles moving. The SUV, the two northern cars, pulling back. Not gone, not finished, but recalculating, because the situation had changed in the way situations changed when the information was already out, already in 12 sets of hands simultaneously, already past the point where stopping the laptop or the drive changed what the story was going to be. They could still make arrests. They could still put people in rooms and apply pressure. But the window for suppression had closed at 7:59 in a public library, and the men in the unmarked vehicles were smart enough to know it. Cruz was the one who told her. He sat across from Dana Kim at her kitchen table and laid out what he knew. The contractor structure, the Meridian Group, the communication logs that connected the deputy director's office to a man named Garrett, who had been inside a motorcycle club for reasons that were now part of the official record. He spoke with the flat forward momentum of a man who had made his decision in a parking structure and was not going to reconsider it on the way down. Kim listened. She recorded. She asked 3 precise questions and accepted 3 precise answers and made 3 calls in succession that Ryder was not in the room for, because by then he was outside on the front steps, sitting in the cold, not thinking about anything in particular. Mason came and sat beside him. They were quiet for a long time, the city around them making its city sounds, distant traffic, a dog somewhere. The specific hum that cities made at night, the aggregate sound of 10,000 lives proceeding without any knowledge of or interest in the thing that had just happened in a Phoenix residential street. Mason said, "Garrett." Ryder said, "Yeah." 6 weeks. Mason looked at his hands, the specific stillness of a man who had processed something all the way through and had come out the other side carrying it rather than being buried by it. "I keep running it back, 6 weeks of sitting at tables, 6 weeks of club business." He stopped. He knew about the Kingman Review, the Federal Review. They offered him something. Probably. He was scared. A pause. He made the wrong call. Yes. Doesn't... Mason stopped, ran his hand over his jaw. Doesn't change what it was, but... He looked at the street. He was scared and he made the wrong call, and now he has to live in that, wherever he is. Ryder looked at him. "You okay?" Mason looked at the question like he was examining it for structural integrity. "No," he said. "Not right now." A pause. "But I will be." That was the honest answer, so Ryder accepted it. The front door opened and Lena came out and sat on the step below them, which put her in the space between the two men, which might have been deliberate and might not have been. She had her backpack on her lap. She was looking at the street with her ancient eyes, which were, Ryder noticed, slightly less ancient than they'd been 4 days ago. Not healed, not even close to healed, but different. The eyes of a child who had been through something and had not been destroyed by it, which was the most that could be said, and was, in the specific context of everything she'd been through, extraordinary. She said, "Ms. Kim says Carol is okay." Ryder looked at her. "She had someone check," Lena said. "Carol didn't break." They pressured her and she didn't say anything. A pause. "Ms. Kim says I can go to her when it's safe. She says that'll be soon." "That's good," Ryder said. "Yeah." A long pause, the city sounds, the cold air. "She also said my mom's story is going to come out. All of it. That people are going to know what she found." "Yes." Lena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Not smaller exactly, but closer to the surface. "She worked so hard on it. She stopped, pressed her lips together. "She worked so hard and she didn't even get to see it matter." Mason said very quietly. "It mattered before it was published. The work mattered. The 8 months mattered." He looked at her. "The fact that you're sitting on this step right now, that's her work mattering." Lena looked at him. "She got you out," Mason said. "She planned every piece of it, the paper, the laptop, the drive. She got you out before she was gone." He held her gaze. "That's a woman who knew what she was doing mattered. She didn't need to see it to know." The street was quiet. Lena looked at the step between her feet for a long moment. Then she reached out and put one hand on Ryder's knee and one hand on Mason's boot. Not looking at either of them, just the 2 points of contact, small hands on worn leather and worn denim, the specific gesture of a child locating herself in a world that had recently tried very hard to make her unlocalizable. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. The cold air sat around them and the city hummed, and somewhere in 12 newsrooms and one federal prosecutor's office, the work of a dead woman was beginning to move through the world like a current, unstoppable now, the thing she had given everything to create finally doing the thing it was built to do. Vomit. The arrests began 6 weeks later. Not all at once. The architecture of a federal case that size moved in pieces, the charging documents filed in sequence, each one pulling the next like a thread. The deputy director's name appeared in the third filing on a Thursday morning, and by Friday it was on every front page of every publication that had received the package on a Thursday night in November, and the story that Claire Hart had spent 8 months building had become the story that everyone was talking about, which was what she had intended, which was what she had planned for. Harlan Voss surrendered to federal marshals on a Tuesday. Daniel Yates was arrested at an airport boarding a flight. The network that had moved behind the official one for 7 years began to collapse in the specific way that networks collapsed when the architecture holding them together was removed. Suddenly, completely, with the kind of finality that left people staring at the shape of the space where the thing had been. Francis Doyle testified for 4 days. His knee bothered him throughout. He answered every question without hedging. Cruz testified too. His daughter was 9 years old and her name was Maya, and she visited him twice during the proceedings. And both times she sat in the gallery with the specific focused attention of a child who understood that what was happening in that room was important, which she did because her father had explained it to her, which he had done because Ryder had once told him that honest answers were worth more than comfortable ones, and he had decided to try to be that kind of father going forward. Garrett was found 3 months later in New Mexico, living under a name that didn't fit him. He was charged. He cooperated. He was, by all accounts, a man living inside a decision he could not take back and had stopped trying to justify. Mason did not contact him. That silence was its own kind of verdict, and the only one that mattered. Lena went to Carol. Carol Reyes lived in a white house on a bluff above the Northern California coast, where the Pacific came in gray and enormous and permanent, the kind of ocean that put human scale in its proper context without being unkind about it. The house smelled of coffee and old books and the salt that came off the water on windy days. The guest room had a window that faced the water and a quilt that Carol had made herself, badly, in the specific way of people who do things not because they're good at them, but because the doing matters. Lena sat in that window for a long time on the first day, just watching the water. The backpack on the floor beside her, unzipped now, the sealed envelope opened and read in private. Whatever her mother had written to her taken in and placed somewhere interior that belonged entirely to Lena Hart and no one else. When Carol brought her hot chocolate, from scratch, not a packet, because Carol had learned from Claire, and Claire had believed that the real version of a thing was always worth the extra 5 minutes. Lena accepted it with both hands and looked at it for a moment and said, "She told me you'd take care of me." Carol sat on the edge of the bed. Her eyes were full but steady. "She told me the same thing." "She was right," Lena said. "Yeah," Carol said. "She was right about most things." Lena looked at the water. "I'm going to be a journalist," she said, "when I grow up." Carol looked at her. "I know it's dangerous," Lena said. "I know what it costs." She held the mug with both hands, the steam rising. But she said stories mattered because the people in them mattered. A pause. "I want to do that." Carol put her arm around the girl's shoulders. Neither of them said anything else for a long time. The ocean came in and went out. The light shifted. The guest room held them in the particular warmth of a place that had been made ready for someone, not as a transaction, but as a form of love. Ryder left Phoenix on a Saturday morning in early December, when the desert had the specific clarity that came with cold, dry air and winter light, every edge sharp, every distance accurate. He rode north first, for no reason except that north felt right, and then west, which was the direction the road suggested when you weren't going anywhere in particular. He stopped once, outside of Kingman, at a diner that was nothing like the diner where it had started. Smaller, older, with a coffee that was worse and a piece of pie that was better. He ate at the counter and watched the parking lot through the window and thought about the specific weight of the last 3 weeks. He thought about Mason, who had gone back to the Road Wolves and was rebuilding in the specific way Mason rebuilt things. Not by pretending the damage hadn't happened, but by being present in the space where it had, steady and continuing and unwilling to be defined by the wound. He thought about the club and what it had cost them, and what they had done with the cost, which was the only question that mattered when the accounting was done. He thought about Lena's hand on his knee on those front steps, the 2 points of contact in the cold, the specific weight of a child locating herself in the world through the people she had decided to trust. He thought about Claire Hart. He thought about her the way he'd been thinking about her for 3 weeks. Not with grief exactly, though grief was part of it, but with something that felt more like recognition. The recognition of a person you would have wanted to know. The recognition of someone who had been afraid and had done the work anyway, not because she was fearless, but because she understood that the fear was beside the point. He paid for his coffee and his pie and went back to the bike. On the road again, the desert moving past him in its stripped winter version, bare and enormous and requiring nothing from him. He reached into his jacket pocket and found the piece of paper. Lena's paper. The one he'd kept without thinking about why, the one with the escape route and the password and the underlined "Do not trust police." He held it for a moment, one hand on the throttle, the desert road straight ahead. Then he folded it once more, carefully, the way it had been folded when she gave it to him, and put it back. Some things you carried because they were useful. Some things you carried because they were true. Some things you carried because putting them down was a decision you weren't ready to make yet, and maybe never would be. And that was okay. The carrying was its own kind of honoring. He rode west. The desert opened up ahead of him, wide and pale and indifferent in all the ways that meant it had room for everything, for grief and damage and wrong decisions and the long, slow work of becoming something different than you were. The Harley moved under him with the steady reliability of something that had covered too many miles to be bothered by one more, and the cold air came through his jacket and into his lungs and felt, for the first time in a long time, like air he wanted to breathe. He was not healed. He knew that. The ghosts he'd been carrying for 11 years were still there, had always been there, would probably always be there in some form. The faces from Marja, the voicemail he'd gotten wrong, the long particular loneliness of a man who had come back from the war in one piece and spent years being surprised to find himself still alive. But something had shifted. Some internal geography had reorganized itself around a new fixed point, and the fixed point was a girl in a pink jacket watching a door, and the moment she had walked across a diner and said, "Please pretend you're my dad," and the fact that he had said, "Sit down," which was not a heroic response and was not a clean one, but was the right one. And he had known it was the right one before he'd known anything else. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the room was also the safest place a broken child could find. He hadn't understood that before. He understood it now. The highway stretched out ahead of him, long and straight and lit by December sun, and the Harley moved through the desert with the particular sound of an engine doing exactly what it was built to do, and Ryder Kane rode west into a morning that was cold and clear and his. Behind him, in a white house above the Pacific, a girl watched the ocean and drank her hot chocolate and carried her mother's letter in a backpack with a constellation pattern and was, by most definitions, safe. That was enough. That was, in the end, everything.